I watched a young soldier take his seat on the plane, and the guy by the window said,
hello, my name is Kurt Borger. I am the library director at the Riverview Public Library. And today we are interviewing Clarence Martin Haley, who is a Riverview resident and who is a veteran of the Navy during World War II. So first, Clarence, I would like to ask you, where and when were you born?
I was born in 1926 in Scottsbluff, Nebraska.
What were your parents' occupations, and how many siblings did you have?
Well, I had a twin brother. My dad worked on the railroad, and my mother and my sister both died of tuberculosis. So I have a twin brother, and I had another brother that died also. So basically, I was always living with relatives. And one good thing, they never separated. We were twins. They never separated.
What high school did you attend?
It was a town called Weiser, W-E-I-S, Weiser High School. It was on the Snake River. The Snake River where we were was on the border between Idaho and Oregon. That's where Weiser, Idaho. Right at the Idaho has a long neck, and that's the extenuation of the Canadian Rockies, basically.
So you were in school before you entered the military?
I was in school when I entered the military, right, high school.
Now, were any of your family members in the military during or after the war?
Well, I had an uncle that was captured on Corregidor in the Philippines, and he died in a Japanese war camp. So he must have gone through that. So basically, I would say that didn't. I was a high school student. You wanted to get in. That's basically.
You enlisted instead of being drafted,
I enlisted.
correct?
Both my brother and I enlisted. We went down at 17. You had to have parental permission, and my grandparents were my guardians, and so we went down. We were one to enlist in the Navy. My twin brother and I. We were juniors in high school. We just turned 17, and I had the flu, and I failed the Navy physical. And my brother passed, and he went into service, and he went to the West Coast. And I didn't pass the physical, so I went back to high school. So in the middle of my senior year in February, when I turned 18, I went down and enlisted in the Navy and went to boot camp in Farragut, Idaho.
What year was this?
44.
You enlisted in the Navy.
Yeah.
Why did you choose the Navy as opposed to another service?
Well, I really don't know. My uncle being captured in the Army, we both wanted the Navy for some reason. And he made the Navy first.
How did you end up in Riverview?
Oh, okay. I was attached to a seagoing squadron, and the squadron was sent to different locales and we trained on a specific thing at that base, and they sent our squadron to Grosse Ile, and we were on radar training. Our squadron, it was radar training for the entire squadron, and the squadron consisted of 12 aircraft. And basically, we were at Grosse Ile maybe about 3 months. We were in radar training, and one nice thing about it was we're on the Great Lakes, is that we call it chasing the boats up in the ore boats, for practice, and using your radar and everything, and then picking up these different, and that's what we did.
Were any of your family members in the military before, during, or after your service?
Yes, my twin brother was also in the Navy.
He was also in the Navy.
Yeah.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, my twin brother and I, when we turned 17, at that time, since we had legal guardians, if you were 17, you had to have a signed permit. When we were 17, we were juniors in high school. Okay, and we both went down to Boise, Idaho, and we were both going to join the Navy. And I had, like I say, we were twins, and I had the flu, and he passed the physical, and I didn't. So he went off to the Navy, and I went back to high school, and that's how we got separated. And he went to the Pacific, and he had a rough life he was on a lot of different invasions in the Pacific.
What did he do?
He was what they called a machinist man, and he was on what they call a landing ship dock. And the landing ship dock hauls a lot of small craft, and it's a small craft that the Marines get on, and then they take them into the shore. You know.
Right, so he was on the ship that the landing craft were on.
Right, and he was on several invasions. He was on Okinawa, Iwo. He was on Iwo and the Philippines.
Yeah, I believe Okinawa was probably one of the largest naval battles. Well, that's where the United States Navy had lost, I believe, the most ships.
That's right. It was hell.
Right, because there was a lot of kamikaze attacks and that kind of stuff.
I was just the opposite. I went back to high school, and my senior year, when I became 18 in February, I enlisted in the Navy, and they sent me to boot camp out in Farragut, Idaho. A boot camp of all places in Idaho, Farragut, Idaho. You know, Idaho has that long neck, and that's the Canadian Rockies extension. And they put a boot camp out there.
The Navy did even.
The Navy did, on a big lake. I don't know why the Navy ever put a boot camp way up there, but it was a good place. And it was on Coeur d'Alene, Lake Pend Oreille, and it's a big lake, and there was plenty of room for, we were trained to, like in rowing and everything, and it was cold, you know, and if you splash water and you're a raw recruit, or is slapping the water, and you get covered with frost and rain in a hurry. You know. But it was good training. It was a good base. What they did there is the Navy sent you to a lot of you were allowed to pick 4 things which you thought you might like. I always liked radio. And I put down radio, and I put down sonar man, and I forget what the other 2 were. And you take the test. Then if you pass the test, then they'll sign you out of school. And I had picked aviation radio, and I passed the test. That's how I got aviation radio. So, and sonar man, I'm not musically inclined now. They give you the sonar test. They'll play several notes, and then they'll play the same several notes over, and they change one half something, you know, and you're supposed to pick out which note. And I flunked it royal. You know, I'm not a musician. So when I got back, the chief of the unit says, "Did you deliberately fail that test?" And I said, "No, I did that all on my own. I was not a sonar. You know, that wasn't my ability, but I passed the radio. Aviation. That's how I got in it.
You mentioned the rowing part in boot camp. What other physical training did they make you do?
Oh, it was a lot of marching, a lot of drill, you know, and a lot of basic schooling, because they're sorting out. If a lot of guys would deliberately flunk, but they didn't realize what they were doing because they were immediately shipped out, and they were apprentice seamen, seaman third class, doing mess cooking and everything. You know, they started out on the wrong foot. You know, they had to work their way up again. And they thought it was, I'll get, 17, I'll get in action. You know, and they were gone. They were deliberately drunk sometimes. You know, just, but they were making a mistake. I realized what they were doing.
By deliberately flunking, then they were getting the worst jobs.
They were being sent to a ship, but they were going to do mess cooking and anything else that basically wanted to go to school.
What was the hardest part about boot camp?
You know, I guess the discipline. You know, you couldn't leave the base; you had to have permission. And the rigor and learning to live by the rules. You know, I would say, yeah, they made a man out of you.
Well, you didn't have much of a problem living by the rules, did you?
No.
You don't seem like the rebellious type unless you were that way when you were younger.
Yeah, I would say I couldn't really say, I really didn't hate boot camp, and that sounds wrong, you know.
Actually, the veterans that I have interviewed, many of them have said the same thing as you, that they didn't mind boot camp, or at least they're saying they never said that they hated it.
I remember one of the things we had to do was they put you on a platform that was 20 foot in the air, and you had to jump over that into the swimming pool. And when you look down on 20 feet, that's a mile. You know, that's a long ways down. And I remember, and I was a long swimmer, you know, but they teach you how to swim. But I wasn't that good of a swimmer, I thought. And anyway, you walk up there and they tell you jump. And I looked down and I backed up. And I remember the chief, he said, I told you to jump. You know, that water wasn't near as bad as him, you know, so I jumped, you know. There was no doubt about it, you know, I think I'll go, you know, things like that, you know. Yeah.
After boot camp, you mentioned some specialized training. Is that what you did after boot camp?
I went to radio school, radio and radar school in Memphis. And that lasted about 6 months. And then from radar school, I was assigned to a TBF plane type, and that's a 3-man plane.
What does TBF stand for?
Oh, the F stands for Grumman, and Navy knowledge, F is Grumman, and half the Grumman aircraft were made by General Motors, because, but they were made under a set plan, you know, and you couldn't tell the TBM from a TBF. The TBM meant it was made by General Motors. TBF made by Grumman, under Grumman contract. You could, when you climbed aboard, you did a different plane or something, you had a TBF, you had to look at it on the serial to see if it was TBF or TBM. They were identical aircraft.
What does TB stand for?
Torpedo bomber. And the Grumman aircraft replaced the TBD, that was the Disaster type 3-man plane. And they, in the Battle of Midway, Squadron 8 was 8 planes. 8 planes went in on a torpedo.
They were all destroyed, weren't
and
they?
every one of them was shot down. There was no survival.
Yeah, those weren't very good planes, as I...
No, they weren't.
Yes,
they weren't.
As I remember.
And the TBF was an excellent plane. It would flap its wings to get there. But they lost. You know, sole survivor of Torpedo 8 was Ensign Gay. And I was attached to the squadron where Ensign Gay was the commanding officer. But he was also retired.
Mm-hmm.
And So that would be, then you always had the same pilot, you know. So you were.
So you were a close-knit group.
Yeah.
In the training in Memphis, where did you go after that?
Oh, well, Memphis, the radar school were both in Memphis. Then they sent the gunnery school. The TBF was a pilot, a radar, and a gunner. And the TBF had a turret, and so it had a gunner. Okay, when our squadron, we were in rocket training, and that was the last unit of the training. And that was at a base called Chincoteague, Virginia. Little air station, something like Roseau. And the Chincoteague is right off the coast of Virginia. And there's two islands, there's Chincoteague and Assunteague. Assunteague you might have heard of. That's where that island has the wild horses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have heard of that.
You can see each other. So Chincoteague, we were at Chincoteague and we got orders to report to a carrier, a new carrier in Seattle, Washington. And we were scheduled in 2 weeks, to pick up the carrier. We'd fly, we'd take it was your planes.
Mm-hmm.
That was the beginning of our real training hours. So we were doing a lot of sub-patrol. We flew out of Maine down here within training type. And so it was as a squad. And I got sick with pneumonia, and I got taken out of the squadron, and my squadron left without making another radio man. And they went on board the Ben Franklin. And the Ben Franklin was one of the carriers that really got shot up.
In the Pacific.
In the Pacific. So I got assigned to a new squadron, which was starting all over again. So then that's how I got to Roseau. Roseau, our squadron of 12 planes, our unit was assigned to, was sea going young. Believe it or not, I was on Roseau getting sea pay, because our unit was a sea going unit, you know. And we weren't attached to the station as station keepers. We didn't do patrol, you know, we didn't do guard duty, we didn't do we were a unit that was separate, you know. So basically that's how the unit would work. We were trained in radar at Roseau. And what we would do was radar training. They would put you on an aircraft, maybe there'd be 8 of you on it, you know, like a transport. And they put a hood over you, and we might be up in Lake St. Clair, and there's an airboat in Lake Erie. And they would say, well, that's a Japanese battleship. Now you've got to put a torpedo into it, you know. And you could pick it up on the radar. Then you would tell the pilot, you guide him in, and then say the ship is ahead, and what you would do is you'd come in on the starboard side, and then you'd come in on that warboat, and you were telling the pilot what to do, and then you were being graded on how you were doing. And then when you got within 2,500 feet, you say drop it. He drops the torpedo. So that would like how some of the training would be. Or maybe you go up to 10,000 feet, dive bomb. And what they would do, part of Lake Erie, that one section was restricted, and they would drop a marker. It would be like a green dye about the size of this room. And what you do is start at 10,000 feet and down, and you try to hit that in the dive bomb. And what you would do is just call out to the pilot, the altitude. He's busy lining up. So when you get at 2,500 feet, and you would say 2,500 feet, you drop the practice bomb, and you pull I mean, that type of training. It's interesting. The Navy had brought out a new type of torpedo plane. And so we had to start all over again. We got a new plane. We got to get used to that, you know. So we trained in this new plane, the TPY. And the Y stood for consolidated, made by consolidated. And so we had this new squadron, and we were one of the very new squadrons with this type of aircraft. And we had orders to report on board this carrier, and the war ended. So glad we did that.
Oh, the war ended before you went on the new
We
carrier.
were two weeks from going on board.
So were you mostly land-based then?
I was always
You were always land-based.
Well, I was on the cook. We did a lot of
Submarine patrols, right?
submarine patrols. Things was I caught pneumonia, so I lost my squadron. That squadron that I was in went on board the Ben Franklin. That was the name of a carrier, and it took hell. It really
Yeah, the Franklin served in the Pacific.
Yeah, it
yes.
really got shot up, and I missed it, and I got assigned a new squadron. So I started new with a new squadron. You know, that's what. So, and then we got the new aircraft, so we started over again. So basically, that's my history.
So did you ever catch any German submarines or see any while you were there?
No,
While you were flying? No, never did.
Well, this is towards the end of the war.
Right, and so the
They were-
U-boats had actually gone out.
You know, it was amazing. We might be 40 miles offshore, and you're coming into Miami. You know, you could see the reflection, you know, of Miami way out to sea. And Miami never went dark. You know, submarine, all they had to do was aim at it. You know, I mean, for navigation, there was no problem. It was a fallacy of you had to dart everything, or you couldn't dart just a little bit of it because something else was lit up, you know. So the coast was never really dark. But,
Yeah, it wasn't total blackout
it
conditions.
sure was.
How did you stay in contact with your family and friends?
Horse riding too. And there was aunts and uncles, you know. So when I got out of the service, I went to an aunt in Wyoming, and I worked for the railroad. My first job out of the Navy, I was working for the railroad as a laborer on the track again.
So this is what you did after you got out of...
Yeah, I was going to make some money to go to school, but I was also under the GI. So I was, I think I worked for the railroad maybe 4 or 5 months. And I went to a school down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in electrical engineering.
What school? What college?
Oh, it was Spartan School.
Or was it technical school? Or?
Yes, it was Spartan School for 18 months in radio engineering, and then came back to Detroit. I was one of the Lordstead, and I went to work for Detroit Edison. Then I retired from Detroit. But that's where I met my wife. We got married. And then we moved to Trenton in 55. And I've been down the river ever since.
You've been in the downriver area 50 plus years. What year did you get married?
48.
How many children did you
I
have?
have four boys. One of my boys and his wife were killed in an auto accident. And 3 of my sons, all have masters, all have good jobs. They're doing fine.
Do any of them live in the Detroit area? Do any of them live in the Detroit area?
Well, one and his wife are school teachers in Wyandotte, and he teaches at Roosevelt. And she teaches she was teaching in Wilson School in Wyandotte. And I have another son that worked at Edison, and he was principal auditor had a son and another son. They had their own company in electronics. So all my sons still are.
Any grandchildren?
I have, let's see, 3 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. And all my family's doing very well.
Do you stay in contact with people that you knew from your military experience?
You know,
At all?
I was in 3 different squadrons, you know, and after the war, our commanding officers, Lieutenant G, he got a job flying for TWA, and so maybe a few years, but then we just got apart, and he died maybe 8 or 10 years ago. Nice guy. But he was that soldier for people. One that you could say it was good, they used him on war bomb drives, you know, because the soldier. And our squadron was part of that. You know. So we would go along too, you know, the squadron.
So you're going all over the country
yeah,
on this?
We were doing all right, and he was a nice guy.
Do you belong to any veterans organizations?
American Legion, I'm still.
You're still a member of the American Legion. If there's one thing you could tell us about what you learned from your military experience and your service during the war, what would it be?
Well, you know, I learned a lot in the radar schools, you know, in the radar schools. You know, and so the Navy, I always figured the Navy was good. Yeah, I learned a lot.
All right, Clarence, thank you very much for coming in today and taking some of your time to talk with me today and being interviewed and to ask all these questions. And I'd like to thank you for that again. And I would like to thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
This is the
You're very welcome.
moment. This is the day when I send all my doubts and demons on their way. Every endeavor I have made ever